Now we are on to our opening panel of the day. I'm very excited about this panel because it was covered a lot more yesterday than I thought it would be. Regulation was probably mentioned the most out of any other word during day one. And it's good to actually have a deep dive into those particular topics and have some real experts covering this. So the panel itself is called Regulation and Conformance. And again, it's how AI is influencing processes and regulatory bodies. It's moderated by the absolutely brilliant Roger Pasola Dolader, Growth and New Products Solar for Galp. So over to you, Roger.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Roger Pasola, moderating the panel on regulation and conformance, how digitalization and mostly AI is influencing processes and regulatory bodies. So Alejandro, you mentioned it very well. We need almost 4 pillars. One of them is data governance. Second of them is process automation, how we leverage data to foster these regulatory processes, and also add a service layer to put customers at the center. But it's not only about these 3 pillars, but also about culture, unleashing people potential. We need to have fully purposeful people to make the energy transition happen. So here today, we will cover real use cases along the whole value chain with real purposeful people. Let me introduce first the panelists. First, we have Tzeni Varfi. Tzeni is a legal and policy director at E.DSO. She is speaking from Brussels. Hi, Tzeni. How are you?
Yeah. Hello. Very fine. Thank you for having me.
We have as well Carly Binns. Carly is the Chief Planning Officer at EDF in the UK. Hi, Carly. How are you doing?
Good morning. Yes, very well, thank you.
And yeah, we also have Ivar Clausen. Ivar is speaking from Oslo. He is the head of certificates at Statnett. Hi, Ivar. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Cool.
A bit dark, I've been told, but it's only the camera, it's not me.
Well, I would like to start thanking Adam and the Future Energy System for lining up this great panel. We have a clear roadmap for net zero emissions. We need to increase renewable penetration on the generation side. That's why we have Carly with us. But also, we need this energy efficiency first, this electrifying consumption, making sure we consume just the energy we need. But this energy coming from real close to zero emission sources. We will be speaking with Ivar as well on electricity certificates and how to trace renewable generation is matching with consumption. And we also have Tzeni here because to do so, we need to make this physical delivery happen. We have a clear roadmap, and whenever we need to have, let's say, more a hands-on approach and start delivering, we see that digitalization is a crucial tool to ease every single process when it comes to planning generation, when it comes to issue renewable origin certificates, and also when it comes to how this electricity is delivered to consumers and how consumers can leverage this data to also have a key role on the energy markets. So from the generation side, we will start speaking with Carly. Carly Binns is Chief Planning Officer at EDF in the UK. Carly leads the teams responsible for securing the necessary planning and land powers for the Sizewell C nuclear power station project, but also continues to provide strategic oversight and advice on planning and land matters in connection with other nuclear power plants like the Hinkley Point C station that is currently under construction, and also provides strategic oversight and direction on all other large-scale generating projects, including gas and solar. Hi, Carly.
Hi.
Carly, let's talk about this technology, digital technology applied to the grant development consents. Okay, at the time, we are seeing across Europe and across the world that countries, utilities, developers, businesses are adopting ambitious targets to developing new renewable and low carbon capacity. I just talked with renewable developers that were going from few gigawatts to almost 100 of them in less than 8 years, because the targets are from 2030. So how do you foresee the application of software intelligence into the key activities of new capacity constructions? That is site selection, feasibility study, the granting development consent.
Yes. So I think when you take a step back and you think about the enduring nature of the regulatory process, you realize it's embedded not only in the sort of initial site selection and the site characterization, but also in terms of securing the necessary consents and then monitoring its acceptability during the operation and maintenance phase. And so it strikes me that by pulling together all of the information for that enduring lifetime of the project makes sense. At the moment in the UK, it very much looking at each stage alone, and actually the information that you need and gather is useful all the way through the process. So there may be people on this call with a lot of expertise, but I think there's a real gap in the market to think about platforms for digitalization that actually bring together the whole of the duration of the project. Sorry, there have been some steps in the regulatory regime. We've seen some digitalization of environmental impact assessments, but that's quite short-lived in the overall longevity of the project. And I think by keeping that information live would be incredibly advantageous for everyone involved in energy projects. It's not without its limitations. Obviously, the consenting and regulatory regime touches on all people in society, so local communities, and the expertise within the regulators. So how do you ensure through digitalisation you don't disenfranchise people who might not use that? And I think that's an important consideration as we move forward. But I think it will help in terms of the transition from a virtual into a real project, as I say.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we can really deep dive on, well, what use cases have you been involved recently, and in how digitalization mainly, well, which specific tools have you been using to cover this granting development consent in the UK? So
yes. So in the UK, there has been a creeping want for digital environmental impact assessments, so people can literally understand what does it mean for me as an individual. So it will put, if you went to your house, for example, you could understand, well, what's the noise impact on me, what's the visual impact, by sort of pulling it all together rather than having to read a document of over 1,000 pages, probably more in more complex projects such as Sizewell C, but actually bringing it to the individual or the particular organisation. I think that makes it far more accessible for people to get involved in the regulatory process. It simplifies, and I think there's a real advantage to that. The other thing I didn't, but sorry, in that they tend to be quite short-lived. You'll get your consent and it just sits on a digital shelf. How do you actually start to use that information to inform the contractors that go on to actually implementing these sites, so they know from a landowner perspective, these are the commitments and controls that we need to adhere to during construction and operation. Similarly, for those individuals affected, this is what we thought were the impacts, but actually what does it mean in real life, and is that correct, or have things changed? I think just on a separate note, you mentioned the huge ambition, not only in the UK, but across the globe, about this transition to zero carbon. And actually that means there's a real emphasis on getting sites delivered. And there are some perfect sites, either from an environmental perspective or from a grid connection. How could we, and this is a question for the audience who have probably far more expertise, how can we use digital to bring developers together to actually create energy hubs? Because as we move away perhaps from large gigawatt into perhaps a number of smaller projects, albeit all working towards the same goal, it strikes me that there's a real opportunity to use digital to facilitate actually getting larger, more strategic sites away, albeit with different developers facilitating that.
Do you foresee this digital platform should be developed by every single developer, or are you trying to make kind of a consensus? Because it will be interesting from the maybe how companies compete with each other to really see those sites, because at the end of the day, this is so this is their business, right? So could this be a tool internally developed? So specific companies or company per company need to develop specific digital capabilities to tackle this in order to have a competitive advantage? Or are you more thinking on a, let's say, pushing from governments or the regulator having like the, let's say, a specific platform where every single developer needs to apply in order to get this development consents?
I think it helps having a common platform so that it doesn't matter where in the country you're developing a site. Actually, all of the regulators have got the same information, and having that consistency actually facilitates them as decision makers. It sets the rules for a developer, so it doesn't matter whether you've got a lot of experience like EDF Energy have in terms of consenting and regulation, or perhaps some of the newer members to the market, which might be their first project, or they're doing lots of smaller ones and they don't actually have the in-house expertise. So I think having a common data platform would actually be very beneficial for the energy sector as a whole.
Yeah, so you are, I think we catch your point. So it's more the regulator and let's say more official governments, in this case in the UK, pushing for digital standards, so that it doesn't matter where are you applying for this project. And I think, well, we already covered this topic, and I think Ivar has a lot to say here, because we see the market is trying to go towards digital technologies, mostly the private sector. But when it comes to official bodies, we don't have enough capacity, maybe, or they don't have enough capacity to tackle this, let's say, more structural way of digitalizing process and dealing with the different private stakeholders that they need to. So maybe it's time to present Ivar Clausen from the, let's say, more market and transmission side. Ivar is speaking from Oslo. He's responsible for the Norwegian energy certificate system in Statnett. Well, Ivar, you are also the head of certificates at Statnett, and also the board chairperson in the Association of Issuing Bodies.
Yes.
This is the association managing the European energy certificate system. standards for guarantees of origins in Europe. So I think you have more or less a wide view on not only on a national perspective but also on a European perspective. And well, how are the different market actors, these utilities, retailers, consumers, big corporates, small businesses on the private side, but also these public stakeholders willing to adopt these new technologies to certificate this 24/7 renewable energy from suppliers?
First, I would like to say if Carly related to this at the end of your talk, I didn't catch it because I was kicked out of the solution for a minute or two. But luckily, I was able, obviously, to get back in just in time to hear my name being called. So that's so sorry if I'm not able to sort of link it to what Carly ended with. But I think in the first Q&A, Adam said that regulation was one of the topics that had been discussed or brought to the table most frequently yesterday. And I think it's when you look at the different market part or the different stakeholders or the different actors, it's important to realize that at least one of us, the regulators and the public and the different government bodies, etc., we are bound by regulation. So if technology proves or comes along, a new technology with new shiny features and new opportunity comes along, well, as long as it is not in line with the existing regulation, it's really not that important, because our first and foremost goal is to be compliant with the regulation, and that's what we're set up to do. So I think from my point of view, personally, I'm a technology enthusiast, and I really enjoy and get excited about new solutions. But when you look at the market as a whole, you need to realize that one very important part of the market, the government issuing bodies, in my case, or other government organizations, we are bound by regulation, and that's our prime goal, is to deliver in line with those regulations. And that might sound boring, but I think if you found that the government appointed organization stopped adhering to regulation and just went on doing whatever they found useful and interesting, we all would be much worse off. So in my book, the word bureaucracy is a badge of honor and not something to look down on. So it is for the government. I think it has never been the government role to be sort of technology front runners. Our goal is to stay a bit in the background and see what comes out on top, and let the market deal with everything that doesn't prove to be the way it was in all the initial PowerPoints. Because if the government bodies were to jump on all the nice shiny things that comes along with an army of salespeople and very enthusiastic entrepreneurs, we would be worse off. So it's up to the market to make a lot of the costly mistakes, and then the government issuing or the government organizations around Europe can sort of pick up what seems to be the long-term viable solution. And this right now, from my point of view, from the GO world and GO being guarantees of origin. So from the guarantees of origin, we see that some of those strong technologically driven market operators are more into the technology than understanding the link between technology and regulation. And for instance, for tracking systems, energy attribute tracking, what you're dealing with, of course, is that when you're basically trading in trust. That's sort of my mantra when it comes to guarantees of origin and other AACs across the world, is that you're trading in trust. And then it is critical that the market doesn't move so fast that it's actually making claims towards their clients that they don't have sufficient backing for. And one of the things we see now, the 24/7 matching of energy consumption to energy production. I really understand the excitement of it, and for some also the need. But right now, it's for me the market is moving a bit quick, because a lot of the issuing bodies that issue the certificates around the world, they are nowhere near that. They don't have the data, the foundation to provide anything which is even remotely close to 24/7 matching. So there we are in a situation where the drive of some very large and resourceful, and I would say loud actors, they're pushing for something, but the foundation, the data needed to make this claim correct and viable, and also approved by a government or another neutral third party, is not necessarily there. So I think it's very important that, yes, the market should push and have a lot of new initiatives, and entrepreneurs should come along, but the government bodies should not necessarily move on the first time they hear of a new initiative. We should sit back and wait a bit and make sure that what we are supplying is viable in the long run, and that it also serves the whole market need and not only those who are the loudest. But on the other end, I do think there is room to move a bit quicker for a lot of, again, in my world, the issuing bodies, which are they're called, the government bodies that are responsible for issuing guarantees of origin across Europe, and to have a bit more, to look a bit deeper into what the users, and in my case, the traders of guarantees of origin and power suppliers, etc., across Europe, and to have a bit a more keen eye on their needs, and not only develop their systems from a government point of view. Clearly there is room for improvement there. So I'm not saying that we should just sit tight and do nothing and let the world run its own course. But for instance, 2 years ago, blockchain, everyone in the world said that the geos had to move into blockchain. Now we don't hear that much anymore. Now we hear more about the 24/7. So, but what we see, and I think the overarching aspect of this whole conference is about added complexity, needing more. You could call it AI, or you could call it automation, but at least you need more, you need less human interaction in the day-to-day operation, because everything is becoming more complex. And that I completely agree to. And in my registry, the next registry in Norway, we have had this API first approach and machine-to-machine communication as our prime channel when we developed our new system. And this is clear. This is in line with that thinking, and saying that, okay, we know that now most of the operations are manageable for people. But 5 years from now, or 7, 8 years from now, it is clear that the matching and the volumes are going to be so big and complex that doing this manually is simply not going to cope. So we are allowing the account holders across Europe to connect to our system through API and perform. If they build a back office system on their own, they can perform actions automatically in our system. But we are not providing the optimization. We are not providing the business solution. This is for the market to provide. But we provide a platform where they can do what they think is needed in our registry through an API. But if they need advanced matching algorithms or AI or prediction or whatever to serve their needs and to serve their clients, then it's up to them to build it. But we're saying that everything you need to do on the formal end, you can do automatically with our system. You don't need to You don't need to do it in a GUI and sit and click and select and do it like it was done in the old days. And there I think that the governments have a role in providing platforms that can interact when needed in a way that is useful and necessary for the market, but it's not necessarily the role of the government to be the front runners and define which technology is needed, but to open up our platforms and say that yes, you can do this in the web interface if you like, but if you feel that the complexity is getting too high, then of course it is much better if your system interacts directly with our system and makes more complex operations possible.
I think excellent, Ivar. I think you very well mentioned that we really need to escape from the hype of new technologies because of new technologies being said, blockchain for traceability, etc., and really focus on what the market needs and serving market needs. And I think this API first is it's the let's say the most addressable way, so that you foster the development of the market needs and not just the implementation for the technology itself. It's also and I think later on Tzeni will develop on this, but it's also a great thing on how the private sector and the public, let's say, regulatory body interact in order. So when is the time to implement a specific technology? So you need to try, I think. So yes, the private sector needs to make the first costly tests and pilots, but maybe there's kind of a way, namely a regulatory sandbox, to prove whether the regulator has to implement one specific technology, because yes, there's a performance-driven reason to adopt this technology or not. But I think Tzeni will develop later on. Thanks, Ivar.
But I can just comment shortly on that, and I think because a lot of the new technology that we see now comes from IT and telecom, and where things historically have happened really quick. When you set up a new, it's not long ago, I remember that I was really happy when I got 4G signal on my phone. Now I expect there to be 5G everywhere, and that's 5 or 6 years ago when 4G was all the rage, and now I expect 5G wherever I walk, and that's happened in 5, 6, 7 years in the power industry. And I don't have that long a background in the power industry, but remember that we come from a place where we historically build with a 50 or 75 year lifespan of the investments, and when you have a 75 or 50 year lifespan of a line or transformer or a production device or whatever, when you come from an industry that has that kind of long culture, to say that you just need to apply new technology like that, it's not going to happen very quickly, because you have so much, the responsibility you have to take on when you make a 50-year decision rather than when you make a 5-year decision. It's a completely different way of thinking, and I'm not saying that the energy world shouldn't be challenged, but I'm saying that if you want to challenge it efficiently, you must remember where it comes from, because we have production devices in Norway still operating they're almost 100 years old, and they're still producing electricity feeding to the grid, and when you come from that, it takes some time to adopt to a very agile and modern approach.
For sure. So first, we need to focus on developing understanding market needs. This microservices layer is, I think it's the right approach, because that's the first way to digitalize and to foster processes. and we can focus later on implementing new capabilities. Okay, so maybe we can switch to Tzeni from the more distribution system operator side. Also, how the end use sector can work with the, let's say, with more data. This is always needed. There's a needed interaction with distribution system operators. So well, Tzeni, speaking from Brussels, Tzeni Varfi is the Policy and Legal Director at E.DSO for Smart Grids. She's an expert in advocacy strategy and EU decision making, and she previously worked as senior legal counsel in the intellectual property and IT law in the regulatory and trade law departments at Pearson, Brussels for over 12 years. Yeah, you've been going through various positions dealing with environmental law, data protection, and energy policy. So, Tzeni, we are very pleased to have you here.
Likewise, Tzeni. Thank you for having me. Yeah, can you hear me well? I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
so thanks so much.
Let's probably you have a bird's eye view on how on the level of digitalization of the let's say the bunch of distribution system operators that are across Europe. So, Tzeni, can you share some of your experience on the level of digitalization from the DSO companies across different European states?
Sure, certainly. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be in the panel and the last to speak, because the scene was set already by Alejandro. He said a lot about what's going on the distribution side, namely on Iberdrola, but Iberdrola is a member of E.DSO for smart grids. The association I'm representing, we talk about leading DSOs, which mainly they are monopolistic in their respective countries. And when it comes to digitalization, of course, you can imagine the more investments and kind of touching upon new technologies are those ones. And I'm also happy that Ivar touched upon blockchain, and he said something you need to think about the past in order to build the future, and that's exactly what we are experiencing as a DSO level. And my background, really, I'm a lawyer on data protection and things like that, but touching upon energy is really a challenge. So what we have now as DSOs, the challenge ahead of us is massive, as you can imagine. First is digital transformation waiting for us to react as quickly as possible, considering that we have aging infrastructure. Then you can imagine that we have the main role of DSOs, the traditional role, which still remains, is security of supply, reliability and resilience of the electricity grids on one side. But we have a new role now. We have to think about how to make that happen in the digital transformation and the energy expectation, the energy transition we are living in. Therefore, that has to be accompanied with necessary technologies, distributed energy sources, grid edge technologies, sensors, data analytics, all these things that Alejandro mentioned at the beginning. But the good news of this is that we are in the driving seat because we have smart grids. So as you can imagine, smart grids is something, a key component, a kind of key ingredient when we speak about digital transformation, because that leaves us the possibility to have a simultaneous view of consumption on one side and demand on the other one, but also to predict better in terms of preventive maintenance, forecasting better. Somebody here mentioned electric vehicles. That would be possible only to be connected to the grids via the smart grids, or to have the possibility to forecast via the smart meterings. So the situation we are encountering today, just to give a hint on the question you asked, Roger, it's when we ask our members about what's happening, it's rollout smart meter target has been achieved more or less by 80%. Therefore, that means it's more or less connected to 140 million connected customers. However, that means that there are still a little bit polarization in terms of kind of technologies they are using. So the landscape is very fragmented. Some of them, they are using blockchain. For others, does not make sense, as Ivar mentioned rightly. Some are using storage, and some they are not there yet, are considering wires option instead, or investment alternative to network investments plans, and so on. So that is a little bit what's happening. On the digitalization side, I would say that we are trying to figure it out whether all our members represented at E.DSO are using SCADA systems. Probably you are aware of it. It's an IT technology. It helps us to build on the data that we gather via the smart meters and to make this medium voltage substation remotely controllable. Then we have asset planning that we are trying to forecast as much as possible. For instance, just to give you an indication, some of our members are very advanced about the smart metering. As I mentioned before, smart metering allows them to forecast the future. Therefore, when we say we have to build 100 charging points in that location, it's via the smart metering that we predict in the 5 or 10 years to come where the forecast help us to build those charging points, in which location, in order to avoid outages of the power system. Therefore, it's important. And artificial intelligence, just to touch very briefly upon it, and then I'm happy to hear from you whether you have any other question. We are using more and more because, as you can imagine, we have to forecast, to optimize the network operations, predict maintenance, cybersecurity issue is also involved in there. But there are two novelties. We just found out while consulting our members. One is predictive maintenance for assets, and coming again to what Alejandro and Ivar said, in order to detect which of these infrastructure assets are failure or is about to become obsolete, there is no more human dimension going there and verifying, but we have artificial intelligence helping us or some of the distributors to identify in order to prevent the failure. And one other novelty is artificial intelligence used for vegetation management. And that it makes sense to all of you because, as you can see in the streets, the power lines are very close to the trees. Therefore, when there are very bad weather conditions, we want to prevent any hazardous moment to be happening, but also to put human life in danger. So artificial intelligence is helping DSOs to prevent these things happening, and we're having kind of in-ground expectations remotely. And that helps us a lot. Of course, that does not come with no challenges. I have to say these were the good news, but when we speak about artificial intelligence, digitalization, you have to think about aging infrastructure, low skills internally of DSOs, customer expectation on the other side. They are expecting a lot from DSOs, regulators are expecting a lot. That is the intensity of the challenge we can take on board. We cannot do things overnight. So that are the challenging points I want to leave you with. I hope it makes sense and it encompasses a bit what's happening around Europe.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, well, later on we can go over the questions, but yeah, there's a lot of topics here, like for instance, who are the range of customers. So we have end users, but we have also different types of customers from the DSO side, namely all the stakeholders that interact with DSOs and that need to be at the same level of digitalization or at least the same level of speeds when it comes to plan, when it comes to build, when it comes to whatever the solution. And as well, customers interacting almost in real time with the energy group. But I have a second question for you, Tzeni, which it has more to see with the role of E.DSO so the role of E.DSO when it comes to implement or to suggest or to guide governments and DSO members towards new regulatory measures. So what proposals, what remuneration schemes are you proposing from E.DSO to incentivize digitalization in DSOs? Because we see that for sure there are a lot of use cases. it makes a lot of sense. But depending on the regulatory framework, this is, well, adopting not at the pace that everyone wants, right?
Definitely. No, I'm happy you mentioned. It seems that regulation is the main topic of the past days, but also today. And I will take on board what Ivar said. We as DSOs are a regulated business, so that has to be clear. Therefore, everything we do around our gravitation cycle, we have regulators being alongside the investment plans we need about digitalization. What that entails, I think it was in 2021 that CIRE Regulators Council made a study asking DSOs what they think, and we come up with regulatory sandboxes being one option, pilot smart grids projects as well. It makes sense for us. But we outlined to the regulators that if we want to make digitalization happen, it has to be with innovation and investments. And one of the DSOs, our members, also tackle about TOTEX. It's very technical terminology, but trying to keep the balance between CAPEX and OPEX in terms of investment. So the risk we have in order to accommodate flexibility service has to go within necessary investments. That is the only way to kind of protect also the DSOs. We cannot make any kind of investment and see whether they make sense or not. We need the right investments to put on track on the right things, including even energy storage and so on. So I think that came a little bit from our side. Now what's happening also, probably transmission systems are very familiar with that. It's 10-year development plan that gives enough time for them to plan. They have been doing this exercise since forever. Sometimes they do a middle kind of medium-term investment plan in between 10 years. It seems that DSOs have to do the same exercise. It comes from electricity directive. And the idea is that we have to see how we can manage this plan, because the European regulation, or in terms of national application to this rule, it's a little bit different from one country to another. Therefore, we are trying to figure it out what is the best way to do this investment plan for the 10 years to come. And of course, coming back, smart meterings helps a lot for the investments, but also in terms of predicting better and having this planning and upgrading the grid, and making the right investments in the right places. So I think we are looking from regulators. Now we have to, as you said, everything is interconnected. We have to speak to the customers about their needs. We have to speak to the regulators, how to best incentivize the change. We have to speak to manufacturers about what are their kind of interaction with the grid. We have to speak to my colleagues in front of me today, Ivar and Kali, permitting and certification, everything. So everything has to be consulted in a multi-layered level, not any longer playing alone the game and trying to figure it out what is the best solution.
Excellent, Tzeni. Excellent. Thanks for your thoughts here. Well, it's time for the audience to submit their questions. We can start with one question which may sound like really broad, but is it really digitalization or the access to data from the consumer perspective? Is it a priority? How do you see the end consumer being empowered by data? Does this make sense, or this is some sort of a claim that Ivar said? Maybe we need the private sector to propose things, but we need to regulated bodies. We need to adopt just the ones that make sense. So, what's your view on the customer having access on all sort of data? Is it what customers really need? Is it what customers really value from the electricity sector?
If I can just be so blunt as to start, I think it's very important in these discussions to distinguish what is the customer, because if you when this question is asked so broadly, I think it becomes a bit uninteresting, to be honest, because we need to separate between private citizens and private households that has one type of need, and then businesses with a much larger consumption, and also distinguish between different type of consumer from the business side. Because as a private citizen and private consumer and private household, my need and potential or my personal engagement is very high. But my wife, her personal engagement is absolutely zero. And for those of us who work with these issues on a day-to-day basis, I think we overestimate how much the rest of the world is actually interested in this. So for it to be of interest to me as a private citizen, or to private citizens or private consumers, private households, I don't think access to data is of any relevance at all. But that someone that can supply a service to me has access to those data, that's a completely different issue. So I want a service that makes it easy and cheap for me to save on my energy bill. That's the only thing I'm concerned with. I have no, as a private household, no other concerns. But I think we need to target, as I said, more diversely, so that when we speak of consumers, we separate out the private households and treat them as something later in the line, because there is so much flexibility and so much to be gained from targeting all the big consumers, medium consumers, because the really big ones, they're already doing this. So the small and medium, the smaller factories, the shopping malls, those kind of consumers, I think there is a much more potential and easier to get more flexibility and more output from than going directly at the private households. But this is my personal private view, and nothing backed neither by Statnett or the AIB or whatever. But I've been in this business for some time, and I think we exaggerate our importance to the private households, and we would hit the target better if we realize that, well, electricity is really exciting and really important, but only to a few. To most people, it's mainly a cost and not something that have their hearts go beat faster.
Yeah, Carly. Please
Yeah,
go ahead.
I couldn't agree more. It depends on your own individual perspectives. But when you look at the challenge ahead of us, irrespective of which country you live in, climate emergency, the real need to increase generating capacity, it's incumbent on us all to really think about how we can expedite that. And I think digitalization is part of that. It's also about a compelling policy need and people really getting behind the message. So I think whatever can be done to speed up getting these really important projects off the ground and into generation, it's incumbent on all of us to play our part and facilitate that.
If I may end. Yes, I agree with Ivar about diversification. That's totally right, because obviously you can imagine the challenge, but also in terms of expectations. So that's clear. But as a lawyer, I would say there is a huge interest when it comes to the data. So for us as DSOs, the expectation from the customer is, what are you doing about the data you gather? And that is very sensitive, because you might not be interested about, you want just to pay the cheapest bill. That's all, it makes sense to all citizens. I'm looking for the service that offer me the best with the cheapest cost. But my data, yes, I do care about. If they know if I'm switching off or switching on something, television, and they know how much time I spend here and there, that is intrusive in terms of GDPR and e-privacy and all this stuff. And then I think people get sensitive. Also, you have to understand that if you talk to my grandmother, of course, she will not know anything about this, and that she will be completely lost. So it's also about knowledge about what thing can happen behind the meter and what the distributions are doing, taking into account sometimes for us, it's a matter of clarity and transparency with the customers, because not in all member states, the one operating the smart meters are the DSOs. So for us, it's also the challenge to explain a bit the landscape, who is behind that collection of data. And of course, that makes it challenging for every citizen to have the right to know. So of course, I would say good news about customer empowerment. We have appliances, applications but it's good, I think, to give the possibility to the citizens to know what's happening with our energy consumption. And if they can perform and manage that correctly, it's even better for their life and also to save energy for the others. But that's the perspective from DSOs.
Yeah, I think, well, yesterday at the Spanish Energy Conference, we were talking with a lot of guys in this sense. So I think there's a lot of, so we need to prioritize digitalization for let's say the customers that really need digitalization to proceed with their, let's say, business as usual activities. Okay, so yes, most of all are more in the, let's say, B2B side, but also what we do at Galp Solar Energía Independiente is also, okay, we let's say created a digital native platform to speed up the rollout of distributed energy resources. We need to gather all the data, but always, you need to put this data also at the service, or you have to put visibility on the data that you are gathering to the customer. So you present the data to the customer, to the end customer, okay, the, let's say, more residential private one, and they will use, they will have access to that data if they want. But this will never, let's say, be, at least as of today, a core, let's say, lever to make a core value proposition for private customers. Okay, you have this data, you have, let's say, freedom when it comes to energy. No, because at the end of the day, we will get to that point, but at the end of the day, the engagement with the electricity sector or with the energy sector from the consumer side, the residential private one, we are not at that point yet. I think so. If I may add, let's say, our point of view, but for sure, this layer of digital services that you are building to make your business as a company, I think this is not the future, but the way to accelerate the energy transition. So I think we've been covering in the panel that we need to advance. We have a clear, let's say, roadmap when it comes to net zero objectives, but we need to get there, let's say, in the fastest way possible, and minimizing errors and optimizing asset maintenance, etc. So I think digitalization is key in this, let's say, key activities of all the stakeholders involved on making the energy transition happen. And for sure, the end customer is a stakeholder in this energy system, and we need to, let's say, educate them in order to increase the level of engagement. But as of today, maybe it's not the priority to give them all the power or all the, because they are not, they don't have incentives to play or to be more engaged with the electricity system. Okay, we have one last question from Akraf, talking about SCADA systems are more efficient and suitable for energy grids than blockchain. Maybe we can pass this question to Tzeni, and maybe Ivar has also something to say.
So if I understood correctly, the person asking the question is referring to solar power as being more efficient.
SCADA systems.
SCADA, okay.
More efficient.
Oh. It's a matter of different DSOs, as I said. Some of them are very enthusiastic about blockchain. It works for us, and that makes our life better and easier. Some others have come with different technologies and saying this does not make sense. So it's true that the saga of blockchain has paused a bit. They are less enthusiastic, but I cannot really tell. I'm not a technician to say whether one technology works best. I'm just hearing what our member says about what they are exploring as a possibility. So I don't know what the best answer for this is. Probably if you test it and you see this makes more a valuable added value to your company, why not? And we are trying to flag to the Commission those things because there were some front runners from the Commission officials saying, go for the blockchain, try to use it, make the best of it. You will see the advantages, and they understood that it's much more complicated than that.
I think I could contribute along the same lines from my, of course, not related to SCADA systems as they are not part of the geo or the geo world, but I'm more into defining what we need to provide and what services the market needs and the regulators need, and what services do we need to put into this to make it all happen, rather than focusing blindly on one technology supposedly going to save everything and revolutionize everything. So for me, blockchain is one among many other technologies. It has its definite advantages, clearly, as I've understood, and some of the and its clear disadvantages, and some of the disadvantages they have been related with historically, like high energy consumption, etc. They're fighting those disadvantages, so they are becoming less and less of a problem. But still, my point is that what are we providing in the geo world? Yes, we are providing a good solution to track production and allowing consumers to make a single and verified claim to the renewable part of a produced megawatt hour. And this is easily solved with existing technology. And the sort of the blockchain hype in my world was related to things happening immediately, and 24/7 matching and immediate issuing of geos, and then immediate canceling by the consumers, etc. And yeah, I don't see that is impossible, but also I don't really see that is where the needs are. I'm operating in a world where most of the registries, as they're called, they don't even supply APIs. They're based on very old technology where it's difficult for the traders to keep stock of their inventory, and it's difficult to so say blockchain is going to change this and revolutionize it. Well, maybe blockchain is one of many nice applicable technologies, but the primary issue is that most of the issuing bodies are providing too old and old-fashioned registries. We need them generally modernization, and if some choose blockchain internally, well, possibly, but we have 31 in AIB, we have 31 or 32 members all across Europe, and for a blockchain approach to work perfectly, all of these 31 have to change basically at the same time. And yeah, let's do something realistic rather than saying that 31 countries have to change at the same moment because someone feels that this technology is better than all other technology.
Awesome. Well, I think
I'm sorry, I'm a bit known for not always being very positive, and that's not the point is not to be too negative, but I find it more valuable to be realistic than to be only enthusiastic for the sake of enthusiasm. So that's yeah, I tend to be a bit realistic.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for your answers. We really appreciate this kind of realistic approach. But I think we all agree that for this to happen, we need, so first of all, adopting new, let's say, disruptive technologies that we have. We have a clear vision on how to become digital first, API first, how to better serve when it comes to regulation and conformance, how to better serve all the involved stakeholders with more traceability, with more visibility, faster, let's say, all the permits that we have. We need also to bring the public bodies official bodies, regulators, to really focus on develop, well, first of all, try to increase the awareness of all the stakeholders on how do we need to proceed in order to make the market work. Okay, so I think that was one of the points that we all gathered. So I think having a standardized processes, platforms, API, microservices, etc., would be I think that the main, or the first, let's say the first step towards making processes more agile and really getting us to reach the targets that we have, not only in the generation side, but also in the consumer side, in the distributed energy side, and how we as a system, as a whole, we can interact with each other to make the energy transition happen. So this is not bad news. This is realistic, a realistic, let's say, roundtable. But I think we can have this takeaway. Let's also, well, we are a European, let's say, roundtable here, European representation. So maybe let's also take advantage of the next generation EU funds to foster this digitalization across these regulatory processes. Let's also rely on public-private partnerships to make this happen and to accelerate, because one of the things that we see on public bodies is, well, the lack of manpower in time. So if we need to address a huge amount of work at the same time, we need also to be to have this capacity to overcome this. So maybe it's time for more agile public-private partnerships to make this happen. And yes, for sure, this will be a key step on reaching our, let's say, net zero goals as a society. Well, I think that's all from our side. Thanks, Kathleen, Ivar, Tzeni, for being present in this panel. And well, I would also like to close thanking Adam and the Future Energy System organization for making this happen.
You're very welcome, Roger. What a brilliant panel. And Ivar, do not worry. I think no one thought you were being negative in any way. I think it's a really good and strong perspective you had. And I think we need discussions like this to move forward as an industry. I like the words that you had, trading in trust, and obviously what you talked about, the guarantees of origin, which is very good. I think the conclusion to that overall, which I found, was to move, but to not move too quick. And obviously, I don't know who mentioned, I think it was Ivar who mentioned it. It was changing efficiently, but remember where it comes from. I thought that was a really clever phrase, because, you know, we talk about heavy industry as a whole, and we don't sometimes realize that sometimes this industry has such a legacy to it, whether it's sort of petrochemical, whether it's sort of power and energy, anything like this, any heavy industry will have a lot tied in with it, a lot of history, and you can't probably just come in and change everything with the space of a few months, as much as you want it to. So really good words. You know, it has got an, you know, as Tzeni mentioned, it's an aging infrastructure, and we've got to sort of respect that to move forward as well. And I liked obviously what Carly was talking about, the planning side. It's interesting to get that perspective actually on this panel about what's needed to develop, you know, to connect buildings and have a digital plan, a digital report. So I found that extremely interesting, really interesting. And I liked one thing was mentioned, that what hasn't been mentioned a lot this event is cybersecurity. I haven't covered it so much in a panel, but it hasn't been mentioned a lot, which is surprising, because we are talking about data a lot, and we're talking about migrating data and also putting data to the cloud, which, you know, by default is a lot more less secure. So interesting to see if that's mentioned anymore throughout the day. But I really enjoyed it. I hope you all enjoyed it as well, as much as I did.